Okay, so that I meant to come back and I just never did, and things happened, and then big church meeting, which was good and fun and really supposed to, but I never did, and hopefully I'll do it tomorrow, but I might not. But what I can say is I just watched a review by Dominic I really love his work, of The Last Battle, which did bring up some concerning things, like the rampant racism that I did not notice when I was reading as a child. But then again, I as a child, I was a very fast reader, but my fast reading was mainly because I was skipping words, so I kind of got the whole perspective of what the book was actually about, but never actually read the content, so I just kind of ignored it and skipped it and did not notice it, so that was like it. But the problem with Susan, I didn't realize this was a big problem, because me as a Christian was like, oh yeah, this all logically fucking makes sense. And then he was even like, oh, the idea of any religion's better than other. It's to unpack what The Last Battle is about, you need to actually be a fucking Christian. So I'm doing this, and hopefully you'll send this to him so he actually understands what's going on with some of those problems, because they're not really problems, because it perfectly evaluates the Christian's idea, and maybe it's a bit harder to understand if you're not a Christian reading the book, because maybe it doesn't explain that completely, but I need to actually share to you what's going on. Basically, there's a guy, he's worships Tash his whole life, and then he ends up in heaven. Basically, the whole point is that because he worshipped Tash his whole life, he ends up in heaven, and it's kind of like, oh, but because you're just doing good things, but even though your name is good, and that's not the thing. The thing was, he was earnestly following Tash because he thought Tash was the real God. He was earnestly following after. He was a true devotee. He was searching after the one true God. He wanted a relationship with God. That's the key part. He wanted a relationship with God. Susan went through all these adventures, but ended up forgetting because she did not want a relationship with God. We have two choices in our life, to be with God or not to be with God. If we are not with God, God will not force us to live in eternity with him. He is not a possessive God. He is a loving God. There are a lot of, which is really weird that you miss this, because it's actually it's sadly a more modern thing of like, possessive love isn't really love. And it's like, well, and yet that's the kind of love the Christian God has displayed for centuries, is that it's an all-encompassing true love, but it's not possessive. You are not forced to follow God. You are not forced to be with God in eternity. But that does mean that you will die in a way that just means you're dead. Nothing, you can't come back. And yes, obviously there is a thing that Susan, in her old age, could come back to the Lord and stuff and things and want a relationship with God again. But she made a choice in that moment. She didn't want to go off and running. She didn't want a choice with God. And you're like, the punishment doesn't fit the crime. And it's like, well, yeah, the world's unfair. It's full of sin. You just got to get a hand of that. And I suppose the best way of saying it, you can disagree with Christian philosophy and say, it's not good and this shouldn't be a Christian book. But you can't criticize the book for it, because the book was trying to communicate in a childlike way Christian philosophy. The best way of putting it, it's not a book for people who aren't Christians. It's a book for child Christians. And like, if you say, oh, indoctrinating Christians and stuff, and that's a whole other thing you can have. You can be arguing over that, but don't argue about the validity of it being a fucking book, because it does encapsulate what a Christian believes. It perfectly encapsulates that in the best way, honestly, possible. Like, it does that. It says, not to have a relationship with God is to go to heaven, you need a relationship with God. Wanting a relationship doesn't actually mean you have one on earth, but the wanting of it, the searching after, the striving for it, is what allows you to get into heaven. And that's, I suppose, the big major thing. Susan didn't want that. She chose the thing. And yeah, you can say that's misogynistic, and yeah, I get that. That idea of that is true. But basically, for a lot of this book, there are a lot of things that it could have been worded badly, and the interpretation at the time wasn't the best. But the best way of putting it is that was the philosophy behind the whole thing. It's that rejecting God means rejecting God, doom. Striving for God, savior. And here's the other thing that, don't know if you know, but Allah is a thing. And they actually often compare that to the Christian God. And while I do accept the fact that the Jewish God, Yahweh, is definitely the same as Christian God, that is definitely a thing, Jewish Christian God. But the Muslim God, it's like, I've heard that, and I'm like, oh yeah, and then the more I research I've done into it, it's totally not a thing. Like, you can believe that, but it's really not. I'm sorry. There's just no. The fact, like, no. Just no on so many levels. You can't say we worship the same God. I'm sorry. You just can't. Yeah, so please stop. Especially since, like, half of your thing says Jesus is a prophet, and it's like, no, Jesus is not a prophet. You want to see, like, you might say, oh, Jewish people say, no, Jewish law says that Jesus was a heretic and a blasphemer. Because he has to be, otherwise, Jesus can't be a prophet in Jewish thing, and he can't be a prophet in Allah. But we can accept that the Jewish God is still the same God as Christian God, is because we know that that's how things are formatted. Like, but yeah, stop saying the Muslim God's the same as the Christian God. It's not a thing. That's not a thing. Very bad at explaining it, but Jews became Christians. Some of those Christians went back to just being Jews and erased the fact that Jesus was the Messiah. Or maybe, and you can debate whether Jesus was actually the Messiah or not, and yada. But basically, that's the thing. That's the connection. Christianity came out of the Jewish principle. Muslim stuff was going on, Islamic faith was going on somewhere over here, and they're like, oh, these two guys are really cool prophets and, like, know a lot of shit. And it's like, you can't do that. You can't say that. You can't say Jesus is just a prophet because he claimed to be the fucking Son of God. Like, that is a thing you cannot ignore. Jesus made it so you can't ignore it. So, you can either say he's wise or you can say he's an idiot. I don't care which, but if you're saying he's wise, you have to acknowledge he's either crazy or wise. Choose one of them. You can't have both. You can't have it both ways. Yeah. Anyway. So yeah, but it was kind of that was kind of the parallel of, like, especially in those last days of this happening. Also, the whole thing of, he also then went on to complain about how doomstic, the fact that the Narnians just fell limply and, like, there was no heroic thing. They had to be by the apocalypse, and I don't think he missed a key point about the book. You see, the book, when we talk about them being like, oh, allegory is the thing of, like, no, I don't think you understand. You don't understand how much these are fucking allegories, as in that book is supposed to line up with Revelations. It doesn't really. I've actually read Revelations and they're kind of different, but a few of those concepts are really there and, like, really a thing of, like, oh yeah, this is what's going on. And especially the whole everything collapsing, and also, like, the whole, like, oh, the Narnians didn't rally. And it's like, you know why the Narnians didn't rally? In the Revelations, it actually says that the 12 tribes of Judah, or the 12 tribes of Abraham, and whatever, don't believe. Stop believing in God. Just not even just don't believe in Christ. It's just they don't believe. They currently don't believe. And they are tortured for several things in the book because they don't believe until some of them start to confess. But it's kind of a very much thing of, like, the tribes of Israel do not believe in God. And this is a big thing. And it's like the Narnians are, you could say, are very effectively parallel to Israel in a way. Isn't that interesting? And did they just collapse? And also that kind of lines up with a lot of things. Like, like, there are a lot of problematic things in the book, but the way the end of the world happened is not one of them. It kind of lines up a lot with what happened in Revelations. Like, a lot. Like, it obviously doesn't encapsulate it, but at the same time, it's a very childlike understanding or communication of what happens in Revelations. Like, it's not parallel thing, but the ideas and concepts behind what Revelations are, and considering a lot of it's prophecy and therefore vision, interpretation and stuff, we're not quite sure what's real and what's going on. It is actually a fairly good thing of, like, yeah, it's obviously not retroactively exactly what's going to happen, especially because it is Narnia, but it's a pretty damn good thing of, like, yeah, that makes sense in the context of what Revelations is. Revelations is the end of the world. The last battle is the end of the world. That's what, in a Christian context, the end of the world will look like. It's a really dark fucking topic. I know that, but, like, there are a lot of things the main things you focused on and what you found bad in the book were literally things that were literally to do with Christianity. You didn't focus on the racism. You didn't focus on the racism. The racism was bad. That's bad. I'm terrified that it was in there, and yikes. The fact that there were even aspects of misogyny in there, that's bad. We should look at that, because, like, ugh, that's bad and really un-Christian, but you focused problems you focused on were the ones that were caused by its Christian nature. You did not focus on the problems that were caused by its not Christian nature, which I find fucking hilarious, because you focus on the problems that literally cannot be changed, whereas you can, instead of focusing on the problems that could be changed and used to create a better narrative. Because I suppose you're not Christian, and therefore you really have no idea what you're reading. And that's fair. And like, as a child, you probably have no idea what you're reading. But the thing is, people who study the Bible and go and read it and go and like, oh yeah, that's, you can see the influences, you can see the stuff. And he was a really heavy Christian. He studied the Bible a lot. We follow a lot of his teaching and stuff. And it's like, oh, he has amazing words about Christianity. You can debate whether he was sexist, you can debate whether he was racist, and all those things should be gotten rid of, because Christianity is none of that. But the thing you need to understand is the things that you criticize most in your video weren't actually things that were bad about the book. Those are actually key details in what the book was supposed to be. And I hope that gives you a bit of context and understanding on why I am so mad at your review, because as I have said at the start of the video, I have a Revelations and that last book have a very special place in my heart. I am kind of obsessed over Revelations and the end of the world and when that's happening. I don't know why, but my brain just fixates on it. It's kind of annoying, and I'm trying to get better at that, but that is a thing. I mean, this book's really precious to me, and honestly, I'm happy that you broke it down in a lot of ways, but you definitely didn't break it down and dig on it in the ways that actually made it a worse book. You focused on the things that actually are what the book's supposed to be about. And I don't know, I'm just sad that you didn't do any of the, you didn't try and do any of the research into why the book's like this. Instead, you were just like, yeah, whatever. Yeah, it is kind of Christian, but whatever. This is a problem with this. The problem of Susan is an actually big problem. And you're like, and then you went on and said, if God is real and loves people, how could he do this? Not understanding that possessive love is not a thing. God loves you, but he cannot make you do anything. We have free will. There is a very big debate. You're right, like, I can't get into it. No, you can't get into it because you're not a fucking biblical scholar. There is a debate on predetermination and free will. And both are kind of the same. God knows exactly what's going to happen, but we have complete and utter free will. Those are two concepts that Christians have to juggle in their minds, and it's really hard and really fucking annoying. You're like, yeah, I can summarize this in one day and say that Susan has a fucking problem because, of course, Susan has a problem. That seems ridiculous. The idea of that being a thing, not understanding that it was a demonstration of a choice in whether or not to have a relationship with God or not to have a relationship with God. It was demonstrating that. You're like, having that happen, it wouldn't have in fact impacted the book. And it's like, actually it would have. And yes, maybe there should be more concern over Susan for the characters, and that should have been demonstrated, and maybe that is a thing. But on the flip side, as a Christian who knows that some of their friends probably aren't making it because they've actively rejected God, it's hard. So the idea that just pain doesn't exist and doesn't need to exist in heaven, despite just the understanding and knowing that they've made their choice and you just have to live with that for eternity. And the fact that the idea there is that pain is just wiped from them, I think that's nice, because you see pain as an object of the human condition, whereas as Christians, we see pain as a subject of sin. Meaning the idea is in that heaven, that pain is gone. Because that pain was caused by sin, and sin is gone. So I suppose it's two different philosophies on life, but I suppose the best way of putting this is don't critique a book because you don't agree with the philosophy it's built on. You can decree the book because of many different things, but if it's faithfully following the philosophy for which it is built on, don't critique it, please. Critique the racism. Because yeah, that's a bad philosophy, because there's not even a Christian philosophy to build on, but please don't critique the fucking Christian concepts behind it, not understanding what you're actually critiquing, because that's the worst part. You weren't critiquing the faith. You were critiquing a book, not understanding you're critiquing a faith behind it. You didn't understand what you're critiquing was kind of biblical in a way. And yeah, so some scholars might disagree with that and go, actually not this, this, and this, and maybe this could be changed and stuff, and like that is a thing. But those were the parts that focused most on the Christianity of the whole story. And I think you need to understand is while those are debated concepts in Christian things, you don't have the understanding or knowledge to be able to debate it in your video. And that's more my message here. It's like, kind of, please be respectful. Please understand that you can hate our philosophy as much as you want, but don't drag the fucking book down and say that the book's bad because it includes those philosophies, even though everyone buying that book, everyone who bought that book, at no point was it ever hidden that these stories were an allegory for the Bible. At no point was this ever hidden. That was like a very ultimate thing. It wasn't just like it wasn't because like, yeah, sure, Tolkien was like, it's kind of bad that you did that, but he also, you made it really obvious that this is an allegory. And it's like, well, yeah, it's like, it is bad in a way, and it's like, you can claim that to be bad. The thing you need to understand, it was never hidden. It wasn't like, oh, it's a surprise that this is the way. No. It was very determinedly written from the beginning. These are Christian novels. And people who don't think these are Christian novels are actually incorrect. These are novels about Christianity put through the title of a fantasy setting. And I think that's a thing you need to actually understand when reading it, going into it. You are reading a fantasy recreation of the Bible. Not everything's accurate to the Bible, but all the philosophy and stuff behind it will be. Okay? Like, and stuff gets wrong. Like, yeah, so the racism, the sexism, bad. But some of the other stuff, no. So, I hope this is helpful for you, Dom, because if you ever see this, but like, yeah. Bye!